Ladies and gentlemen, this is Genesis 127. Please welcome President of American Principles Project, Terry Schilling, Surgeon, Dr. Eitan Haim, and your host, Daily Caller News Foundation reporter, Meg Brock.
Hi, I'm Meg Brock. I'm a reporter for the Daily Caller News Foundation. I'm also, most importantly, a mother of 2 children, and I'm really honored to be here today with these 2 courageous men talking about truth. So this panel is titled Genesis 1:27. If you're not familiar with the Bible, that's the verse that says God created 2 sexes, men and women. There's no third option listed there. And we know that this foundational truth that is so important to our humanity is being replaced with the lie of transgender ideology. And this lie is extremely dangerous. We're seeing how it's harming children medically. We're seeing how our daughters are being forced to use the bathroom with men and compete with men in sports. And we're even seeing parents now losing custody of their children because they refuse to affirm the lie that their child can be a different sex. So I'm very excited here. Today we're going to talk to Dr. Haim. Dr. Haim, I'm going to ask you the first question. Last year, you were working at Texas Children's Hospital, and publicly they had stated they stopped their pediatric sex reassignment program. However, you realized that behind the scenes, kids were still getting these experimental treatments, and you decided to blow the whistle. Can you tell us why you did that, and then maybe what are some of the consequences of that action?
Well, I think the short answer would be I blew the whistle because it was my job as a doctor. We take an oath when we go into medical school and we follow this path that we should do no harm. That doesn't just apply to the clinic, to the operating room, where I spend most of my time, but it applies outside of that. So if you see something that is unethical, that is harmful to innocent, confused adolescent children, it's absolutely my job to do something. And you had the biggest children's hospital in the world tell the public that they were shutting down their program because of the legal risks. They not only continued it, but they expanded it into a multidisciplinary clinic with psychiatry, endocrinology, psychology, social work. They even had the social worker talking about how they were concealing it from governing medical authorities. And when I understood that this was a hospital priority, that they were concealing it behind closed doors, I knew it was my responsibility to do something about it. Because if I don't, then what kind of world am I delivering my children into that this kind of thing can happen? And of course, when we blew the whistle, 1 month later, I had 2 federal agents come to my door on the most important day of my life, my graduation from surgical training. And they had informed me that I was under criminal investigation for exposing the fact that this was happening. And we took the story public a couple weeks ago to let these people know that we're not going to take it.
Thank you so much for your courage. I think if there are any doctors or nurses listening, we need 1,000 Dr. Haims. Terry, I'm going to ask you the next question. In 2022, your organization, the American Principles Project, published a report on transgender ideology. And in that report, you talked about some of the finances around this industry, particularly with the sex reassignment surgery. I think you stated there was it was estimated that in 2026, it's going to be a $1.5 billion industry. Can you talk about some of the finances of this industry?
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you guys so much for having us. And anyone watches War Room, God bless you all, War Room Posse. Those are my people. So we released a report called the Transgender Leviathan 2 years ago. And it detailed not just the medical industry, but the entire monster that the whole transgender industry is. It covered the media apparatus, the educational apparatus. This is not just a $2 billion thing, a $3 billion thing. That's just the surgeries alone. Right now, just last year, the transgender surgery industry brought in $2.2 billion, billion with a B. And it's much bigger than that. It's the hormones, it's the social media. There's a whole media apparatus now that's set up to cancel and slander anyone that steps in the way, including and especially the parents that protect their kids from these harmful and horrific surgeries. And we wrote that report for a very specific purpose. The transgender industry, which it makes a lot of money from big pharma and the hospitals, they're branding themselves as a civil rights movement. This is not a movement. This is not a movement. This is not about civil rights. This is not about living and let living. This is about control, and ultimately, it's about the destruction of gender and biological sex. And that's very important to understand. And that's why they've had to create what we call the transgender Leviathan. Because if you just tackle it from a PR perspective and not a legal perspective and a political perspective and a journalistic perspective, you'll fail. They had to create this monstrosity to force it and coerce it on us. And so we wanted to bring attention to that and really brand it as what it is, which is a transgender for-profit industry.
Thank you. Dr. Heim, something we hear trans activists talk a lot about, I think if you've ever heard Rachel Levin speak, they'll call these sex reassignment surgeries medically necessity care. Oh, geez. We know that that's why they're getting it covered by insurance. Do you think they're medically necessary, or do you think this is more cosmetic?
You know, I think it's important for people to understand that what is happening to these kids is not medicine. In no way is this medicine. But the reason is because you can't treat a psychological problem with a solution of the body. And we've been down this road before. It wasn't too long ago that people were doing lobotomies. They were using a solution of the body, right, where you would actually physically disrupt the brain structure in order to treat severe mental illness. That got a Nobel Prize in 1949. It took years for that to be perceived as barbaric, which it truly is. So this is a part of humanity, right? But it's up to good people to stand up and do something about it. So I wouldn't say it's medical care, it's not treatments. What these people are doing is perpetuating an evil ideology. These doctors have believed they can become God and create something new when the actual goal of medicine is to preserve and strengthen what's already been created.
Yeah, thank you. Terry, you recently tweeted about a couple in Indiana that this week that we saw lost custody of their child because they wouldn't affirm their transgender ideology. Can you speak to just some of the ways like this that this ideology is attacking parental rights and parents?
Well, I appreciate you asking that because I have a boatload of children, as many of you guys know, and it's very close to home for me. But what we're seeing is the red states are passing laws to protect children for the most part. I think we're up to 24 states that have outlawed this. But the blue states and the federal government, fueled and supported by the federal government, are right now passing laws that incriminate parents for doing their job, for protecting their children from this industry that will quite literally chew them up and spit them out with destroyed bodies. But we're seeing, you'll hear about in the news conversion therapy bans, right? These are not conversion therapy bans. They all include a very specific provision that bans the conversion of gender identity. So in these blue states, what they've done essentially is they've made it illegal to talk to children and get them to feel more comfortable and accept their own bodies, but it's totally legal for them to chop their body parts up, to block their natural puberty, to give them cross-sex hormones. They call it hormone replacement therapy. This is not, hormone replacement therapy is for people that are having a lack of estrogen in their body naturally. But they are now, the federal government actually is pushing programs for home visits where they will critique the parents. So if you're a parent that needs financial assistance from the federal government, they will send caseworkers into your home, and part of what they are grading these parents on is whether or not they affirm the child's gender identity. Now, quite frankly, I'm a father, I'm pretty normal, I know I have a bunch of kids, but I think affirming your child's gender identity, their gender, is making them accept their body, helping them, convince them that their bodies are there's nothing wrong with them. And so what we're seeing is the states are doing their thing, but really, this is fueled and financed by the federal government. The federal government, through Health and Human Services, is forcing health insurance companies to cover these types of procedures. When they come out and say it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of gender identity, well, that means that an insurance company that's under Obamacare, if they cover mastectomies for cancer patients, they have to cover them for people that have gender dysphoria. It's absolutely insane, but they're doing everything they can to destroy parents and destroy families, because families, believe it or not, it's not just some trope. Families really are the ultimate bulwark against tyranny. And that is what our founding fathers knew. That's what all of you in this room know. And we have to gird our loins and really hunker down for this battle that's coming.
Yeah, I think that gender is a way to describe personality, right? Sex is something that's fixed, it's biological. And I don't think there's anything worse you could tell a child than something is so wrong with them. They need to mutilate their bodies. They need to potentially be infertile, potentially have no sexual function to be accepted. I mean, that's a lie from the pit of hell. On that point, we know some of these procedures, these interventions, such as puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, they're billed as reversible. But we know that you can't just simply stop puberty. You can't simply stop puberty without profound implications, whether that's osteoporosis, whether that's brain development, or even just future sexual function. So as a doctor and as a surgeon, do you think children can actually give informed consent to these procedures that are potentially going to make them infertile as adults?
It's an important point, because you can't give informed consent to something that does not exist. When I take someone to the operating room for like appendicitis or a bowel obstruction, it's a physical problem that you can see, that you can feel, that you can look at under a microscope. This problem that they're saying they're treating is something that's not based in reality. So whatever risks you're exposing them to is all risk, no benefit. So absolutely not. But it's important to know that the reversible point too. I think that's because one of the most common things they talk about is it's reversible. But when you look at the way that these recommendations are being given, it's either chronic medical patient for life or suicide. Once you're on this road, they're going to stay on that road for the rest of their life. The only other option that they offer is suicide. And what worse situation could you ever imagine putting a kid in when you think about the third option is just telling them they're perfect the way they are? That like going through puberty is hard. And you can grow up to be this great person. You could find a wife, have a family, and be happy. But they're doing the worst thing you could possibly do to a kid.
It's heartbreaking. Yeah, it's awful. So you appreciate you blowing the whistle and how important that is. Sarah, you had mentioned how Republican states are passing legislation to restrict this care. But we're seeing Democrats, a lot of Democrat leaders in Democrat states are actually just going full bore. They're trying to further codify this. Some states have even passed legislation where a child as young as 12 or 14 can potentially access these services, start hormone therapy without parental knowledge or consent. Why do you think this has become such a partisan issue? And how do you think this is going to impact the 2024 election?
That's a great question. And before I begin, I just want to be very clear. Children cannot consent. They cannot consent to this. If a kid can't consent to sex, they can't consent to a sex change. Okay, let's just all agree on that. And by the way, Meg, we'll get to, I think we're going to talk about this in a bit, but I've spent so much money on polling and message testing and message development, seeing where the American people are on this. This is a vast majority of the American people, including 40% of Democrats. We all oppose this stuff. We all know it's crazy for kids, right? But the reason they're doing it is because this is the nature of progressivism. You hear this term all the time, progressive, progressive, progressive. What they are talking about is full liberation. What progressives want to do, and this is very important for you all to understand, things start to make a lot more sense when you understand this. Progressives seek to progress beyond all barriers and institutions, right? And that means laws. That means age of consent laws, right? That means that they want you to be free from your country. They don't like borders, because if you have a country, you're tied to it. They don't like families, because that's why they did no-fault divorce, because if you have a family, you have obligations. You're restricted, right? And ultimately, what this whole trans issue is about it's about liberating human beings from their own bodies, from their own biological sex. That's why they're seeking to do it. And so it's baked into the cake for so many of these Democrats. And there's a handful of Democrats in Texas that voted to ban this stuff, but they're so far gone. I mean, they actually believe that sterilizing and mutilating kids is liberating them from ever having children again. They look at all of us that have families and children as cancer, as slaves to our families. They're perverted, right? They have a disordered worldview, a sordid worldview, and they're now trying to force that on the entire country. And so that's why the blue states, if the blue states are passing laws, Washington, California, and Minnesota, that it's basically state-sanctioned kidnapping. So let's say you're in a red state like Texas where this stuff's banned. If you're a 13, 14-year-old kid and you find someone on the internet that helps pay for your ticket to get you to Washington or California or Minnesota, that state will take you in, away from your family, not bring you back, which is obviously the right thing to do, and they will give you a sex change procedure. Against your parents' knowledge, against their wishes, you're done. You're done. They are declaring war on families, and that's what this is about.
Dr. Heim, just one other question I had for you. We see that medicine, and even pediatric medicine, has been so institutionally captured by this ideology. And there are so few doctors like yourself who really have a lot of skin in the game, who are willing to put everything on the line to do the right thing and speak up. Why do you think that is? What do you think is keeping people from speaking up? Or do you think a lot of people within medicine are just true believers in this ideology?
I think even for the people who support it, I really don't think these people believe it because it's so crazy. Mm-hmm. But I think the reason most doctors don't speak up is a miscalculation. They think that if they say something, they're going to lose their job. They won't be able to pay for college or their mortgage. So they say, well, I have to stay silent in order to take care of my family. But I think it's a miscalculation because they don't realize if they stay silent, the world they're delivering their children into is going to become much more dangerous. And what they're actually doing, they're putting their kids in more danger by not fighting these battles now. Because the longer this goes, the worse it gets. The more rabid these activists become. And especially in these blue states, and we see it, these opposing forces in red and blue states. It's coming to schools in places we live. Like, you can guarantee that. So if we don't stand up now, there's going to be no profession for me to deliver my children into. There's going to be no medical system that we can trust, that you can go to whenever you're sick. Because how can you trust a doctor if they would do this to a child or wouldn't stand against it?
Mm-hmm. Right, absolutely. Terry, in terms of messaging, messaging is one of your areas of expertise. How do you think people can message to help their neighbors, say when they're in the food store, trying to explain why this is so harmful and why it needs to be pushed back on?
Well, so I'll just say, I've spent, within the next few months, I will have spent over $1 million across the country message testing, focus groups, consumer research panels, polling. We're doing swing voters. And I just want to encourage everyone, you are not just in the majority, and this is not my words, this is what our pollster said to us. We are not just in the majority, we are in the super duper majority, right? 80% in some cases, in some states. I think there's a few things. One, there's nothing wrong with these kids' bodies. There's nothing wrong with these adults' bodies either. I mean, adults are getting harmed by this as well, and that's important to recognize. But there is no such thing as a transgender child. There are boys and there are girls. Nothing else. And we have to reject any even discussion of it. It is a joke. It is a joke, and it's being played out on our kids. Don't even entertain it. Stop talking to people if they are actually, you can tell within 2 minutes if someone is fully on board with this transgender agenda. And you're either fully on board or you're fully disengaged, right? And you have to reject the entire premise. Men are men, women are women. There can be no substitutes. You can have different personalities. You can dress differently. We don't care about that. But you have to stay the hell away from our kids. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's hard to think that we're really actually having this debate.
Yeah.
Like, I think, like, how far things have come that we even have to debate this issue, and it's something we even legitimize this argument. Right? Like, of course it's not real.
Well, the thing that frustrates me after doing all this polling, and we sat down with suburban women. Oh my gosh, they have the craziest viewpoints, some of them. But guess what? They all think that kids shouldn't be able to get these sex change procedures. So my bigger problem is not with Democrats that are pushing this because they actually believe it. My bigger problem is with the sellout Republicans that are getting paid off by Big Pharma, paid off by the hospital chains, and refuse to do anything, even win their campaigns. Where are these politicians that just care about winning? Right? If you just care about winning and you don't have a moral compass, you should at least support this issue, right? But we have a moral compass, so this is an issue. We often have to choose between doing what's right and what's politically possible. This is something where we don't have to make that distinction, and we need to take full advantage of it.
I just want to ask one last question. Dr. Heim, I took a tremendous amount of courage for you to put everything on the line, blow the whistle, and speak up about this issue as a surgeon. What would you tell someone? I think a lot of people believe what you're saying, Terry, to your point, but are still scared to even talk to a family member. What would you say in terms of why they should step out and have some courage?
For a lot of people in my position, they think that if they were to speak out, the world they would step into is this dangerous, dark world, which is exactly what I thought. But once you get to the other side, you realize the grass is much greener, because for the first time, you can actually live with dignity. You can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I did the right thing. I can live truthfully. Because every day before that, you live a lie. And it might be small, but what happens is it adds up. So,
thank you. Yes. Thank you guys both for speaking. I know this issue can feel very daunting, but the reality is there are two sexes, infinite personalities, and we have the truth, and we're going to win on this issue, and we're going to protect our kids, all of our kids. So thank you guys. Great, thank you.